Have you ever caught yourself telling a story about who you are, and then halfway through it, you realize it doesn't even sound like you anymore? Maybe you're talking to someone you've just met. Maybe they ask what you do, or what you're like, or what you're passionate about. And before you even think, the old answers come pouring out. Well, I'm shy. I've always been the responsible one. I'm terrible at relationships. I'm just someone who overthinks everything. Those are familiar. They're comfortable. They've become part of your identity. But what if they're not true anymore? What if they were only true because you've been repeating them for so long? I think one of the strangest experiences in life isn't becoming someone new. It's realizing you already have. The change happened quietly, little by little, through heartbreak and healing, through conversations and mornings you didn't quit, through decisions no one else even noticed. And then one day, your life no longer fits the story you've been telling about yourself. Well, that's what I want to talk about today. Because sometimes the hardest person to convince that you've changed is you, especially when you outgrow your own story.
Welcome to Aligned AF, real talk for evolving souls with Yahweh Kent. Join Yahweh for honest conversations on spiritual growth, the messiness of life, and how to move through it all at a higher frequency. So grab a cup of tea and let's sail in. This is Aligned AF, and here's Yahweh.
Welcome back to Aligned AF, real talk for the evolving soul. I am Yahweh. I want to thank you all for showing up today. This is a sacred space to me, and I hope to create one for all of you. Now, if the show resonates with you, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a new episode. And please share your favorite conversations with your friends and social media family. It really helps my show a lot, and it gets some tools out there for those that may need them. This is the place where we have honest conversations about spirituality, healing, growth, and what it actually means to be human while we're evolving. So today, let's grab a cup of tea, let's settle in, and let's see if we can recognize the person that you've quietly become. You know, I was thinking about recording this episode the other day because I caught myself doing something that made me laugh. Someone asked me a simple question, one of those questions people ask when they're just getting to know you. So, tell me about yourself. Seems easy enough, right? Except I noticed that the answer coming out of my mouth sounded like it had been written years ago. I found myself describing old versions of me, versions that had been through some things, versions that believed certain things, versions that had fears that don't really live in me anymore. And it made me stop for a second. I thought, why am I introducing myself like someone that I used to know? Have you ever done that? Not because you're trying to be dishonest, quite the opposite, actually. It's because we get so used to telling the same story that eventually we stop checking to see if it's still true. I think all of us do this. We keep telling people and ourselves the story that once explained us, not even realizing that we've already written several new chapters. It's almost like moving into a new house, but continuing to give everyone your old address. Then you wonder why nobody can find you. I know it's kind of a weird analogy, but it works. If we're still handing people yesterday's address, how can they ever meet the person that we are today? And maybe an even better question is, if we're still giving ourselves yesterday's address, if we're still believing that we live where we did, how can we ever find ourselves? I don't think most people wake up one morning and decide they're going to stay stuck. I don't think anybody consciously chooses to keep living inside an old paradigm. I think it just happens. And, life gets busy, years pass, responsibilities pile up, and the story we once needed becomes the story we never bothered to question. When we're kids, we're like little meaning making machines. Everything means something. Your teacher praises your artwork, so you decide you're creative. Someone laughs when you answer a question, so maybe you decide that you're embarrassing when you talk. Your parents argue. Maybe you somehow conclude that it's your fault. It's amazing what our minds can build from a single moment. The problem isn't that we create stories. That's actually one of the gifts of being human. Stories help us organize experience. They help us make sense of a world that's often confusing. The problem comes when we mistake the story for the truth. Because stories are interpretations. Truth is something deeper. I've shared before that one of my favorite questions as a truth coach is simply, is that true? Not, does it feel true? Not, have you believed it for a long time? Just, is it actually true? Now, that's an uncomfortable question because so often the answer is no. Sometimes we've spent decades defending beliefs that don't even belong to us any longer. Or maybe they never did. Maybe someone else handed them to us. Maybe we inherited them. Maybe we created them while trying to survive a season of life that asked more of us than we knew how to give. And if that's the case, let me say this. Don't judge that version of yourself. Please don't. That younger version of you wasn't trying to sabotage your life. They were trying to protect it. And there's a big difference. I think we spend too much time looking backward with today's wisdom. Of course, you can see it now. You've lived another 10, 20, 30 years. You've learned, you've healed, you've experienced things that younger you couldn't possibly have imagined. But back then, they were doing the best they could. And honestly, they deserve a little compassion. Sometimes I picture my younger self sitting across from me. Not to criticize them, not to tell him everything he got wrong, just to thank him. Thank him for getting me here. Thank him for surviving, for trying, for believing there was something worth protecting. Because without him, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation today. I think we all owe our younger selves that much. Compassion before correction, understanding before judgment. Because healing isn't about declaring war on who you used to be. It's about embracing them and then gently letting them rest. The funny thing is, growth almost never feels like growth while it's happening. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like wondering why things that used to make sense suddenly don't anymore. It feels like friendships changing. It feels like saying no when you used to automatically say yes. It feels like sitting in silence instead of rushing to fix everything. And sometimes it feels lonely. Not because you're alone, but because you're no longer comfortable in spaces where the old version of you fit perfectly. And that's a strange feeling. It's like trying to wear your favorite pair of jeans from high school. You remember loving them, you remember how comfortable they were, but now they don't fit. The jeans aren't bad, you've simply grown. And I think that's one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everything that once fit your life is supposed to fit forever. Sometimes you've simply outgrown it, outgrown the belief, outgrown the relationship, outgrown the fear, outgrown the role that you always played, outgrown the apology you kept making for taking up space, and outgrown the need to prove your worth. And when that happens, don't force yourself back into jeans that no longer fit just because they're familiar. You know, there was a time in my life when I thought growth meant adding something, learning another spiritual practice, reading another book, listening to another podcast, taking another class, finding another teacher. Now, don't get me wrong, I still love learning. I hope I never stop being curious. But somewhere along the way, I realized that most of my growth didn't come from adding. It came from subtracting. Subtracting beliefs that weren't true. Subtracting expectations that weren't mine. Subtracting the need to be everything for everyone. Subtracting the constant pressure to have all the answers. It's amazing how much lighter life becomes when you stop carrying things that were never yours to carry. And maybe that's what growth really is. Not becoming more, but uncovering what's always been underneath all the noise. Think about Michelangelo, okay? He once said that every block of marble already contained the sculpture. His job wasn't to create it. His job was to remove everything that wasn't David. I've always loved that image. So maybe your soul isn't asking you to become someone else. Maybe it's simply asking you to chip away everything that isn't really you. Every false belief, every old label, every mask, every role you've been performing so long that you've forgotten it was ever a performance. Because here's the truth. Pretending is exhausting. You can only carry a version of yourself that no longer fits for so long before your spirit starts whispering, there's more. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's a nudge or a feeling you can't quite explain. You look around at your life and think, I should be happy. Everything looks fine. Maybe your career is okay. Your relationships are okay. Life is okay. But something feels off. And I don't think that's because something is wrong. I think it's because your soul knows that you've outgrown the room. And have you ever noticed how uncomfortable growth can feel? We usually assume discomfort means we're doing something wrong. I don't think that's always true. Sometimes discomfort simply means you're stretching into a life you've never lived before. Now think about that. Every meaningful change you've ever made probably felt awkward at first. The first time you spoke up for yourself, the first time you set a boundary, the first time you admitted you need help, or the first time you chose peace instead of proving your point. Probably didn't feel natural. It felt uncomfortable. But uncomfortable doesn't always mean misaligned. Sometimes uncomfortable is exactly what alignment feels like in the beginning. Because your habits haven't caught up with your heart yet. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Sometimes we spend so much time talking about healing that we forget there's support available while we're doing the work. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to walk alongside you for a while. Through truth coaching, we gently uncover the stories and beliefs that may be keeping you stuck so you can reconnect with the wisdom that's already within you. I also offer distance Reiki and Metatron Cube installations for those who feel called to experience healing from a more energetic perspective. You don't have to have everything figured out before reaching out. You don't have to be in crisis. Sometimes all you need is a conversation with someone who can help you see what you've been unable to see on your own. If you'd like to learn more, reach out to me at alignedafpodcast@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. You know what fascinates me? Most people are terrified of failure, but I think we're even more afraid of success. Not success in a worldly sense. I'm talking about becoming who we actually are. Because once you become more authentic, some relationships change, some conversations change, some priorities change. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny anymore. You stop pretending certain behaviors don't bother you. You stop shrinking yourself so other people don't feel uncomfortable. And believe me, not everyone applauds that. Some people only know how to relate to the version of you that needed them. The version that apologized constantly, the version that kept the peace, the version that never challenged the status quo. So when you change, they sometimes think you've become someone different. But maybe you've simply become someone more honest. There's a difference there. And here's something I've had to remind myself more than once. Just because someone remembers an older version of you doesn't mean you're obligated to keep being that person. Let that sink in for a second. You are not responsible for maintaining someone else's outdated opinion of who you are. That isn't your job. Your job is simply to tell the truth about yourself today. Not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, today. Who are you today? What matters today? What feels true today? Because today is the only version of you that can actually love people. The old version can't. The future version can't, only this one. I think that's one of the reasons spirituality can become so complicated. We convince ourselves we're trying to find ourselves. Now, I don't know if that's true anymore. I think we're trying to stop hiding from ourselves. Finding something suggests it was lost. I don't think your true self was ever lost. I think it got buried. Buried beneath expectations, beneath fear, beneath people telling you who you should be. Buried beneath your own attempts to stay safe. But buried isn't gone. A seed is buried. That doesn't mean it's dead. Sometimes the very thing that looks like darkness is actually the place where new life begins. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe life feels uncertain. Maybe the old story doesn't fit anymore, but the new one hasn't fully revealed itself. Maybe it feels like darkness. Maybe you feel buried. So let me try to encourage you with something, okay? Don't rush to write the next chapter of your life. Live it first. Live it now. We spend so much time trying to define ourselves that maybe instead we should just be curious. Notice what gives you peace. Notice what drains you. Notice where you feel most alive. Notice who you become around different people. Those observations will tell you more about your authentic self than any label ever could. Because labels tend to close the conversation, but curiosity keeps it open. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather spend my life discovering who I am than defending who I used to be. And there's one last thing I want to leave you with. I don't think the goal of life is to create the perfect story. If it were, we'd spend all our lives editing every chapter, trying to make ourselves look wiser and stronger or more spiritual than we really are. I don't think that's what this journey is about. I think it's about becoming honest. More honest today than we were yesterday. Now, I've noticed something over the years. The older I get, the less interested I am in appearing evolved. The more interested I am in actually growing. And those aren't the same thing. It's easy to learn the language of healing. It's easy to collect spiritual ideas. It's easy to quote people who sound wise. It's much harder to sit quietly with yourself and ask, where am I still pretending? Where am I still living from a story that no longer belongs to me? Now, those are uncomfortable questions, but I've found they're also incredibly freeing because every time we're honest, we reclaim another little piece of ourselves. And isn't that really what healing is? Not becoming someone worthy of love, remembering that we already were. Not becoming enough, but realizing we never weren't enough. Not earning peace, but removing everything that convinced us peace had to be earned in the first place. Sometimes people ask me what awakening looks like. Now, I don't pretend to have the answer, but if I had to describe it, I'd say awakening is the slow, beautiful process of becoming impossible to lie to. You stop believing every fearful thought. You stop arguing for your limitations. You stop introducing yourself through your wounds. You stop confusing your history with your identity. And you begin living from something much quieter, much steadier, much more real. Not perfect, just real. So before we finish today, I'd like to invite you to try something. Okay? Not right now. Maybe later tonight, maybe tomorrow morning with your coffee, maybe during a quiet walk. But ask yourself one question. If I met myself for the very first time today, how would I describe the person standing in front of me? Not the person you were, not the person you're trying to become, the person who exists today. Would you still tell yourself you're not enough? Or would you finally acknowledge everything you've survived, everything you've learned, everything you've become? Sometimes I think we're waiting for someone else to recognize our growth, a partner, a parent, a friend, the world. But maybe the person whose recognition you've been waiting for is you. Maybe you've been standing at the finish line of a chapter in your life, still looking back toward the starting line, waiting for permission to admit that you've changed. So let me offer you that permission today. You are allowed to outgrow old beliefs. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to have healthier boundaries than you had 5 years ago. You are allowed to discover new dreams. You're allowed to walk away from roles that you've spent your entire life playing. You're allowed to become quieter or louder, softer or stronger. You're allowed to disappoint the version of yourself that was built on fear if it means being faithful to the version of yourself that's built on truth. Because growth isn't betrayal. Growth is gratitude in motion. It's honoring the person who carried you this far by continuing the journey they hoped you'd someday be strong enough to take. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. Your younger self wasn't trying to become who you were back then forever. They were trying to survive long enough to become who you are now. And I have a feeling if they could see you today, not through your eyes, but through theirs, they'd probably be amazed. They'd probably notice strengths you've stopped seeing because they've become so normal to you. They'd probably notice the peace that you've created, the wisdom you've earned, the kindness you've developed, and the courage that you've shown. They'd probably smile and say, "We made it farther than I ever imagined." Maybe that's the story worth telling now. Not the story of everything that happened to you, but the story of who you became because of it. Thank you for hanging out with me today. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to think of one person who might still be living inside an old story. Share this episode with them. You never know when a simple conversation can become the beginning of someone's next chapter. And I'd love to hear from you. What story have you outgrown? What old label have you finally decided to lay down? Those are some of my favorite conversations because they're real, they're honest, and they're reminders that none of us are walking this path alone. So until next time, keep being curious, keep choosing truth over familiarity, keep giving yourself permission to become a little more authentic. Because the most beautiful story that you'll ever tell is the one that's still unfolding. And remember, you're getting closer to aligned AF every single day. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today. If this episode spoke to you at all, share it with a friend or someone who needs it. You can also leave a review or connect with me online. You can find Aligned AF on YouTube, Facebook, your favorite podcast channel, or at alignedaf.org. And if you want to reach out directly, you can email me at alignedafpodcast@gmail.com. So until next time, stay aligned AF.